at the expense of policy coordination in Indonesia. And this has certain costs and consequences. So one of the ways to mitigate some of these costs is actually through the use of what I call coordination institutions, but these have been relatively underdeveloped in Indonesia. So what is the reason for this? I try to explain it, and then I have some key findings, and then I conclude. So I think it is important to highlight what has occurred over the last 10 years. If you look at it, is that really the Indonesian presidency has become a lot more powerful over the last 10 years. If you look at in 2014, when President SBY published his memoirs, Selalu Ada Pilihan, There Is Always a Choice, in which he said that Indonesia's political system, he described it as essentially semi-presidential, in which the parliament could quite easily take apart a president's plans and policies. Fast forward 10 years later, and basically any political observer looking at Indonesian politics would agree that it is virtually impossible right now for the Indonesian parliament to reject a legislative initiative proposed by the president. And so it becomes quite clear that over the second period of the Jokowi administration, the presidency became increasingly consolidated and powerful. And right now, it has reached almost hegemonic status under Prabowo. As Lian Gammon said in his 2025 article, political elites in Indonesia now collectively and preemptively subordinate themselves to a president's preferences. And this is driven by both the rewards of cooperation, but also the perceived risk of defying him. And Gavin highlights that there are three different features of this hegemonic presidency. First is what he calls intensified political patronage, in which state patronage has become a very effective tool to essentially bring all potential strategic and veto players into government, co-opting potential allies and eliminating all sources of opposition. Additionally, what we see now here is automatic elite compliance, which is that the political elite here are no longer autonomous agents. They are able to negotiate independently and at an equal level with the president, but are actually state clients that are fearful of state power, keen to seek state protection as a way to avoid legal troubles. Finally, one key feature of the hegemonic presidency under Prabowo is fiscal re-centralization in terms of how the state budget has been reallocated mainly for Prabowo's priority programs and projects. So, and this has become quite apparent over the course of my fieldwork over the past 1 year, is that there is no more political opposition. Each of the political parties that are in government are either keen to join government because they want to reap certain benefits from doing so, or are not keen to prematurely act to oppose the government. So even for PDIP, the only political party that is not in government, they have basically seen it as not beneficial to them for them to take a confrontational or oppositional stance. As one of my interviewees from PDIP said, the bottom line for PDIP is to not only retain its position at the national parliament, but to ensure there is more than 100 plus regional executive positions are retained. So even for the PDIP that is outside government, they are keen and they are worried that if they were to take certain confrontational positions, that their own party interests will be affected. And so what we can see right now is that this is a situation of virtually total political consolidation. If we were to look at and compare with President SBY and President Jokowi when they came into office in October 2004 and 2014 respectively, they were basically minority presidents facing hostile parliaments. And compare this with Prabowo in October 2024, whereby he clearly enjoyed a super majority in parliament. He had strong political mandate with 58% of the national vote. 80% approval rating, and he was the undisputed leader of his own party. And Prabowo never had to deal with any of the intra-coalition disputes such as like Jokowi faced with PDIP. As one of my interviewee explained to me, Prabowo has imposed full control of his leadership to ensure that all ministers adhere to policy directives and do not deviate from the stipulated path. So this is very interesting because it is clear that this is a situation of almost complete political consolidation in which no one is keen to directly oppose what the president wants. But this is not a situation that also directly translates into government effectiveness. And we can see this across different presidents, right? Obviously, when presidential power is unconsolidated, such as when Jokowi had to deal with his party, PDIP, in his first term, policy chaos is understandable. For instance, in 2015, 2016, when Rini Sumarno, the Minister for State-owned Enterprise, was in government, the PDIP basically prohibited her from attending parliamentary hearings because of the unconsolidated power structure. And even in his first term, very few legislative products were successfully pushed through parliament. And Jokowi essentially relied on executive regulations in order to push through his government policies. But policy coordination remains weak even when presidential power is consolidated, such as with Indonesia's troubled COVID-19 management. And we could see this, right? It is true that back then Jokowi was slow to take action in terms of closing the borders, and he was slow to take pandemic measures when it mattered. But even when the government was serious about taking action, it lacked the capacity to do so. In fact, the government's official COVID-19 numbers were so unreliable that ordinary citizens had to organize themselves to collect data from local hospitals, data from local cemeteries, in order to get a better sense of the COVID-19 infection numbers and fatality rates. And when it came to the distribution of social assistance for needy families and those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, the government had problems with poor data quality and inability to send the social assistance to the places that was needed the most, and even different ministries maintained different and separate databases, creating difficulties in social welfare distribution. So this is not a problem unique to any single presidency. And this is also very clear in the current administration, right? There is basically hegemonic political control right now, but policy coordination remains poor. So in early 2025, there was a drastic budget efficiency drive that basically aimed to cut government budget expenditure by 256 trillion rupiah, which is about 15 billion US dollars over the course of 1 year. And this was very drastic, but the government had no problem in pushing this through parliament. And back then, Prabowo's proxy in parliament, Sufmi Dasko, the vice chairman, was able to very quickly instruct parliamentary commissions to first delay discussions of the new budget until the new numbers have been prepared by the ministries. And then after those numbers had been announced for the parliamentary commissions to discuss and to pass them within a matter of 2 days. So clearly there was no issue of political control here. What was the issue was that the policy was implemented top-down with no consultation and coordination with individual ministries. The budget cuts, the budget targets were proposed by the finance ministry with no understanding of how individual ministries structured their budget. And as a result, many of the individual ministries had to make deep cuts, not just in their regular spending, but also in the purchases or procurement of goods and services, which led to many non-permanent workers being furloughed or retrenched, from airport ground staff to workers at public works to uh, honorary teachers working in schools. So this created a PR disaster for the government, and it triggered a set of protests, the Indonesia Gelap or the Dark Indonesia protests. So this essentially is my research puzzle. Why is it that Indonesian presidents seem so strong, in a sense that they are so easily able to secure elite compliance, but they are also so weak in ensuring that the machinery of government works effectively at the same time? And I think that this is very fascinating, right? Because if we think of presidential strength, we usually take presidential strength to mean political dominance. But political dominance is only one aspect. And here I try to disaggregate presidential strength into two variables, right? The first here is political control, which is how we understand presidential strength normally, which is the ability of the president to secure the active support or passive compliance of the political elite. But a second and equally important variable is policy coordination, which is the ability of the president to ensure that disparate parts of the government machinery are working in a synchronized manner towards common goals. And it is perfectly plausible for a president to be strong in one variable, but also weak in another, as we might have seen. So my argument here is that presidents consistently prioritize political control across administrations. And this is the fundamental structural challenge for the Indonesian political system. Both Jokowi and SBY, and I mean, in a sense, this is understandable why presidents prioritize political control. Both SBY and Jokowi early in their first term were locked out of parliament, with all key positions being taken over by the opposition coalition early on in their first term. And they learned from those experiences and they figured out how to reassert control. SBY, for instance, relied on his vice president Yusuf Kala to take control of Golkar through party contest within the party, internal party contest. And then later on for Jokowi, he relied on his loyalists to intervene in the internal party disputes of Golkar and PPP to bring them into the coalition. And learning from those formative experiences, both presidents later on prioritized political control by leveraging on the tools of coalitional presidentialism to bring all these potential veto players and actors into government. So I think what has happened since 2004 is that there has been a process of institutional learning in which Indonesian presidents have over time learned how to impose political control over the system. But what has become, and this has also occurred under the Prabowo administration, right? So if you look at this chart here, you can see that Prabowo has imbibed the lessons from his predecessors and essentially implemented a very large cabinet to accommodate all potential actors. And you can see that in October 2024, Prabowo created 7 coordinating minister positions, and these were all given to people who are representatives of political parties as as a way to impose political control over the system. But are these coordinating ministers actually effective in policy coordination? I think coordinating ministers are only effective if they are seen as an extension of the president. And it is unclear if many of these figures that are appointed here can be said to be someone who can possibly claim to represent the president. So I think that there are coordination costs to excessive political accommodation in the way that it has happened here. If you look at this chart here, you can see that the Prabowo presidency has essentially doubled the size of the cabinet since the Jokowi era. And I think that there are concrete coordination costs to doing so. To accommodate all these coalition partners, there has to be a dramatic rise in the number of cabinet positions, and this creates more moving parts, which also raises the policy coordination costs. And I'm just provide a few of these examples that have been that has spilled over into the public domain, right? One of them is the first one, in which in June 2025, the Indonesian government actually announced that they would slash electricity tariffs by 50%. So this was announced in June 2025 by Coordinating Minister Airlangga Hartarto. But when the media later queried Energy Minister Bahlil Lahadalia, he said that I've not been involved in discussions regarding this proposal, pointing to, I think, a very clear sign that policy coordination is not working effectively in this government. And not only that, right? The two men are from the same party. It's not like they are from different parties. But whereas Airlangga Hartarto was the coordinating minister and technically outranked Bahlil as the senior minister in cabinet, Bahlil is actually the senior political figure in Golkar party as the chairman of Golkar. So here we can see that unresolved interpersonal issues between the two men, especially regards to the fact that Bahlil replaced Airlangga as chairman of Golkar party, and also that a government that prioritizes giving out political concessions rather than a government that is organized for effectiveness has created this very odd situation whereby policy coordination across ministries is not as effective as it could well have been. And I think that political accommodation has come at the expense of government performance. If you look at this study by Celios think tank, policy think tank, in which they surveyed 120 journalists from over 60 media outlets nationwide, they agreed that, at least based on the survey, that the top 10 worst performing surveys, top 10 worst performing ministers in 2025 are these 10 ministers here. And if you look at their affiliation, they are all either affiliated to political parties or are close to certain social and political networks. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that there's the scale of the political accommodation in this current government has produced perceptions of a certain perception of the government right now, and it is clear that there has been a steadily worsening trend here, in which if you look at the first 100 days, which is in January 2025, the number of people who thought that, survey respondents that thought that Bravo's performance was very bad was about 10%, and it has risen to 45% over the course of 1 year. So to address growing coordination costs, I see that Indonesian presidents have basically utilized one out of two distinctive strategies. The first is what I call strategic appointments, which is that presidents can reserve strategic positions for their loyalists and professionals. And this is a way for them to ensure that ministers are personally loyal to them. But they also sacrifice less important appointments to party ministers, which are seen to have dual loyalties or are less reliable. And this is the preferred approach taken by Indonesian presidents. Since SBY, you will see that the key portfolios that he found personally important to his agenda, from foreign policy, defense, to the economic ministries, many of them were held by technocrats and former military personnel. For Jokowi, the same was true, especially for in ministries relating to public works, to relating to investment, relating to tourism, creative economy. These were led by people from business backgrounds and from his own volunteer networks. Prabowo had many ministries, gave many ministries to those who were his loyalists and were ideologically compatible with him, from like the Ministry of Cooperatives, the BGN, and things like that. On the other hand, presidents can also make use of what I call coordination institutions. These are institutions that can help a president orchestrate and manage government in line with presidential priorities. But generally the tendency here has been that Indonesian presidents use them in a half-hearted manner. If you look at SBY, he created the Presidential Working Unit for Development in 2009 in his second term, and it was developed as the president's delivery unit. But it faced opposition from coalition parties, especially when it tried to evaluate ministerial performance. So as a result of that, the unit never received the full political backing that it needed in order to run effectively. Um, if you look at the Jokowi administration, Jokowi created the Executive Office of the President, or KSP, as a debottlenecking and political communications unit. And I think it was relatively effective in Jokowi's first term in his ability to onboard more uh, Indonesian citizens onto BPJS and other social welfare schemes that the president cared about. So it worked as a way to accelerate the president's priority programs. But it became less effective in his second term as the chief of staff Muldoko it grew distant from Jokowi, and Jokowi became closer to his state secretary Pratikno. Under Prabowo, it seems to me that both the executive office of the president and the presidential communications office, a newly formed unit to handle government communications, was given out mainly to reward campaign supporters in 2024. There does not seem to have been any strategic rationale, and I don't think that the current administration really saw the strategic value of these units that they inherited. And this is an overview of the three key coordination institutions in Indonesia right now. Is the two of them are mainly staffed by career civil servants, the state secretariat and the cabinet secretariat, and both mainly play an administrative function to support the president either as head of state or to organize cabinet meetings. But the roles of these different units ebbed and flowed depending on who was in charge. So under Pratikno in the Jokowi era, the state secretariat gained additional functions, not only playing administrative roles, but also playing the role of an honest broker, aggregating information sources and bringing it to the president. The goal of political communication with political parties, as well as ministerial coordination. So I think that while there has been some dynamism in terms of the development of these coordination institutions, it has really been very much dependent on who was in charge at that time, and the roles of this office shifted according to personalities. And I think that if you look at it from over the period of the last 20 years, you can see that there has been steady growth in the political appointees surrounding the president. So, starting from SBY, there was basically only a very small office, right? It was only SBY, his two ministers, as well as the 8 presidential special staff or the staff khusus. But over time, this has developed into a more robust machinery with the creation of the presidential working unit in his second term, the executive office of the president in the early Jokowi period, and stayed relatively consistent over the entirety of the 10 years that Jokowi was in government. And then it was significantly expanded by Prabowo in his first term. But I think that if you try to understand what is the role of the political appointees surrounding the president, it seems like political patronage rather than the need for political coordination better explains the growth of the political appointees surrounding the president. And you can look at these two charts here, right? There's about 22 presidential special staff, and the majority of them, after I looked at their backgrounds, right, the majority of them are actually individuals with personal links with the president, 8 of them, or they have coalitional ties, 7 of them. And if you look at the 7 of them on the table on the left, you can see that most of them are either chairs of small political parties like P3 and Garuda, and the rest are from the campaign team. So you have three from the campaign team. You have one from PAN, and she's the daughter of the current PAN chairman, and then we have Haji Isam, who is a major donor for the presidential campaign. And I think that political patronage was also prominent in the executive office of the president. Unlike the Presidential Working Unit UKP4, which was set up purely as a technocratic unit, KSP was set up as a political and technocratic office. So it recruited staff mainly based on referrals and connections. So it was quite understandable that many of these staffers tended to have some kind of political backgrounds or connections. And you can see that many of the senior appointments here have dual affiliations, either as academics and activists or are members of political parties and from the campaign team. So if you can see here, there's actually two chief of staff that have links to the Jokowi campaign, and many of the deputies and senior expert staff have political party backgrounds. So it is very true, and I agree with what KSP staffers when they tell me that the role of KSP here is that they are here as political lobbyists. So it makes sense that they are able to access these political connections when working on behalf of the government, and that is completely understandable. But I think we also need to take account of the fact that KSP here has a secondary function as an office to bring in friends of the president. And this makes a lot of sense because the state secretariat and the cabinet secretariat are mainly composed of career civil servants. And so they are subject to career civil servant hiring rules and regulations. Whereas for KSP, there is no such similar requirement, making it much easier for friends of the president to be hired. So I have two key findings. The first is that I think there has been an underinvestment in coordination institutions. In the context of a multi-party system with fragmented national and regional bureaucracies, there has yet to be a powerful hub that is able to orchestrate government activity on behalf of the president. And this is because, in my opinion, due to the focus on political control rather than policy coordination. I think there's few reasons for this, but I think one is that there's a tendency for the political system in Indonesia to prefer power dispersal rather than power concentration. For instance, one of my interviewees said that the president can guard himself against subjectivity because there is the there is the cabinet secretariat who can balance out the ideas of the state secretary. So in that sense, the president himself does not want to have a single center, in this case Jokowi, because that will make that single person too powerful. And that's not just only for the president. The political parties themselves are not keen to have a single center because they are keen to have multiple sources of access to the president. For instance, one of my interviewees said to me that Luhut, when he was serving as the chief of staff, was removed from his position because that the PDIP chairman, Megawati, did not want Luhut to be too powerful and would be able to control the president. I think finally, one very important reason is that Indonesian presidents do not think organizationally. As one interviewee said to me, Jokowi did not want people who could develop their own independent power base. He preferred to keep grants of authority incomplete, balancing out different individuals by handing out the same assignment to different people. And this is one way in which he ensured that he controlled all the options and had all the information that he needed to make a decision. Similarly, for Prabowo, he only trusts political information from those close to him, and therefore there's no need for organization in the first place. I think my second key finding is that presidential leadership styles can partially alleviate coordination problems. Both presidents inherited relatively weak coordination institutions. KSP had a very small budget and manpower. SETNEC and SETCAP were administrative units with that were unable to provide political advice to the president. But both presidents operated on very different organizing principles and managed their governments very differently. Jokowi preferred a more open information system. He did not trust any single source, so he preferred a more freewheeling system that enabled diverse information flows to reach him. And he relied on an experienced, politically neutral figure like Pratikno to orchestrate government and act as an honest broker. The difference here for Prabowo is that he prefers a more closed information system in which everything is more tightly controlled and a system that is better described as top-down management. And because of that, he also relied on mainly young figures that he trusted with no experience in politics and administration, while infighting between key advisors hampered government operations with the lack of any single orchestrator able to function to coordinate government on his behalf. So the two outcomes became very different, even though both presidents operated without strong institutionalization of their center of government or their presidential center. On one hand, Jokowi had a single orchestrator and multiple advisors who could help him reduce informational blind spots, allowing him to function without strong institutionalization. But because Prabowo relied on a closed information system and information was filtered, there was no single operator and institutionalization was poor and he did not empower the coordination institutions around him. There was very poor policy coordination. To conclude, I think that the tendency of Indonesian presidents to prioritize political control over policy coordination is a long-term structural challenge for the political system. It raises coordination costs and has a demonstrable impact on government performance. Like Jokowi, Prabowo emphasized on appointing key loyalists to strategic appointments and giving out the less important ones to coalition partners. Prabowo inherited relatively weak coordination institutions, which were utilized as a source of political patronage, while creating a large cabinet that also raised coordination costs. This highly personalistic system worked for Jokowi because he carefully chose his advisors and worked to cultivate diverse information sources. Prabowo's reliance on politically inexperienced advisors, a closed information system, and his unwillingness to empower coordination institutions have worsened political policy coordination. Finally, some quick implications. I think that my research is trying to build on existing research on coalitional presidentialism. And I'm seeking to emphasize that there's a need to pay attention to policy coordination costs in large presidential coalitions, whereby coalition ministers are either untrustworthy or ineffective. From a policy standpoint, I think that Indonesian presidents should consider investing in and restructuring the coordination institutions that are available in Indonesia to mitigate coordination costs and aim to optimize for political control and policy coordination in a balanced manner. That is to say, not excessive political control, but a more reasonable system that balances in between the two objectives that are crucial for presidential power and presidential strength. And comparatively, I think it is important to highlight, which I find to be quite interesting in this regard, is that Brazil also has a multi-party system. It is a huge country like Indonesia, but it has a federal rather than unitary system. And even so, it has a single coordination center through the civil house. So why is it that Indonesia has a multi-party system with a unitary system of government in which the national government is responsible for rolling out policies that have direct impact at the local level, including healthcare, education, and social policy, but Indonesia lacks these strong coordination institutions that government that is premised on a federal model has. So I think with this, I end here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Again, it is very timely, and I think one key issue that has been discussed throughout the year is about free meals program. So, how do you think about free meals program in terms of political control and policy coordination?
Sorry,
Free meals program. How do you think about the free meals program in Indonesia in terms of political control and policy coordination?
So the MBG program, right? I think that this has to do with we should look at the MBA program as a program that is a kind of, I think the best way to describe it will be choices not taken. Like the current model of MBG right now, uh, could have been very different, and there could have been many other competing models in terms of how this program could have been organized. But a centralized model was taken, which I think is very interesting, and it tells us a lot about the dynamics of the current administration, right? I think the first thing first for MBG, right, is that there were at least one or two potential competing models, and one of the competing models is a decentralized model, right? The current model is extremely centralized. Uh, the National Food Agency (BKN), which is involved in managing the free meals program, is essentially in complete control. And in order for you to open MBK kitchen, you need to be certified by the institution. And so it's a very centralized model. You build a kitchen, you get certification from the uh, organization, and the organization sends their team over, including a nutritionist, and pays the salaries of the staffers to run the program. So the only thing that you are doing as an investor is to essentially contribute your money, right? So that is the centralized model that we have. But there were potentially other decentralized models. And one of the interviews I did back then was that a potential decentralized model was actually proposed to the Prabowo administration, or at least people close to the Prabowo administration, in which what could have been done is that this interview said to me is that what could have been done is to make use of the Bantuan Operational Sekolah, or the BOS. So this regular regional transfer that the central government pays directly to schools at the regional level, and the fund for the free meals program could have been added on to an existing mechanism, the school operational fund, and schools can then use that money to set up canteens of their own, involve parents in the operations of the canteens, and ensure that food that is produced to the children are not only delicious and nutritious but also safe for consumption, right? Which is the problem right now. So I think that could have been a very viable model, and it was not taken up. And people I've interviewed in KSP told me that they actually proposed that model to the current administration. So one of the staffers I interviewed was involved in proposing different models: a centralized model, a decentralized model, and a mixed model of a hybrid model with different with two different models merged into one. The three models were submitted to Prabowo for discussion. Ultimately, the president chose the centralized model, and this is the model we have today. So clearly, that this has been that there has been many problems with the MBG program. Firstly, that when the MBG program was running, there was no presidential regulation to organize and to regulate the program, and there was very poor coordination between BGN and the other ministries that dealt with critical issues to the running of the programs, including uh, the health safety and the food safety aspects of the things, which involve different agencies like BPOM and the Kementerian Kesehatan. So all these different ministries that should have been involved were not involved in the program, because this was a priority project of the president and it needed to be pushed through. And I think that is the problem, right? That a lot of the dynamics that we see here in Indonesia today is driven by the desire to implement political control and not policy coordination. And that essentially is a clear problem with the BGN here, that they wanted a controlled system, one that was very centralized, that which could be used as a patronage machine to benefit to benefit their supporters and people that the current administration felt obliged to or indebted to, and these people were all incorporated into the program as investors and people who could be invested in the program. So clearly the function here, the actual policy delivery was underemphasized here, creating a centralized model that was not as effective as it could have been in terms of delivering the key outcome, which is providing safe and nutritious food for children.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we are open for Q&A, one from professor and two from students. Good day. Hazal, any other question, maybe from students? Okay, yeah, you. Good day first. Okay.
First of all, thank you so much, Jefferson. I learned a lot from your presentation regarding the inner workings of the current administration. And I think the contribution of your dissertation later about drawing attention to the rising coordination costs as the consequence of oversized coalition would be significant to the study of Indonesian politics. Congratulations, first of all. If I may understand your research correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, puzzle and the argument stems from one key assumption. The first of the assumption is that centralized consolidated power correspond to policy coherence and the implementations afterward. The second assumption that I recognize is that all of these politicians rise to power in order to govern, like to govern well, right? Formulating policies and so on. Now, I was just wondering if you would entertain an alternative view, let's say from a study on an alternative polity, imaginary one called Konoha, for example, wherein, first of all, that the motive for politicians to assume power, to rise in power, is not to govern, but first of all, to extract and to capture, right? Wherein increased political control serve a purpose of not governing well and go on unchecked, right? And then that also make it possible that strategic incompetence is actually policy objective, where this kind of environment, the strategic incompetent, is best for cynical practices to thrive. And you don't have to worry about horizontal, what have you, in the standard democratic theory, right? I was just wondering if you would entertain the alternative view. Thank you, James.
Do you want to answer now?
Do you want to answer now or?
Yeah.
I think that those I think you make two very valid points about the assumptions, right? That underpin my research. Yeah, I think you make good points and I agree with you. The first regarding centralized political control, right? That I assume here is that a centralized system works better in terms of imposing policy coherence. I think that is an assumption. Yes, I agree, but at least based on the literature that I've looked at in different countries, in the American case, in the Brazilian case, that yes, it is true that some things can work in a better way in a decentralized form. I'm not disagreeing with that, but for for the needs of Indonesia right now, in my opinion, is that centralized political control, a centralized policy control would work better in this context. especially when there are so many pressing challenges that needs to be solved. There's no solution often for many of these problems, and the president has no choice but to intervene. Then I think it makes sense for some kind of centralized control to take place, especially in the context of the multi-party system you have in Indonesia. If it is a very straightforward system in Indonesia whereby all the members of the cabinet right now are from the same political party, then yes, I think there is less need for that kind of centralized control. But if I may suggest, the way I see it is that a coordination institution here, or what you call as a more centralized policy control function, I think is crucial precisely because the system here is multi-party. So there's no guarantee that your coalition minister shares your views on what should be implemented in government. One of the interviewee I spoke to said this to me, right? He said that if Koperasi Merah Putih, if the red and white cooperatives succeed, this is the success of Gerindra. It is not the success of my party. And I think that is very telling, right? Because like it or not, the different political parties are forced to work together in a coalition, but they have different interests, and the parties are keen to distinguish themselves and to make policy achievements that benefit them electorally. And working with just following through on exactly what the ruling party or the ruling government wants is actually not necessarily in their interest in that context. So centralized political control makes sense in this context. A centralized system that is able to force the coalition ministers that are in government to work based on larger strategic design to ensure that they work in accordance with the president's directives actually makes sense, because otherwise you have policy chaos. So yes, I acknowledge that decentralized model could work equally well, but I think that in the multi-party system context, it is valuable to have a centralized hub that is able to be there to, when say different ministers are challenging each other or are in an argument with each other, there's someone who is able to arbitrate and say, okay, enough is enough. I've heard both sides of the argument. This is the direction that we need to take. Otherwise, there's policy paralysis, right? The second assumption that motivation of politicians not to govern but to extract resources. Yes, I agree, but I mean that's a very cynical perspective, right? And I genuinely believe that whoever comes to power in Indonesia, they have a genuine desire to deliver and to push things through based on what. But I think the problem here is that in Indonesia, you can never fully guard against the problematic actors that want to hitchhike on a important policy initiative in order to get certain goals, to enhance their own private goals. So I would like to say that if there's anything I've learned at all from my 1 year research here in Indonesia, is that if a policy is indeed designed to benefit the people, it will make it will be designed in a way to minimize the number of intermediaries in the system. Because the more intermediaries there are in the system, the more likely you say that everyone takes a cut along the way. And that is just simply the cost of doing business in Indonesia, right? So honestly speaking, the way the NDG is designed currently incentivizes bad actors to come into the picture, because precisely of that, right? That the supply chain is very long. Like I explained to my Indonesian friends, right? If there's anything I learned about policy making in Indonesia, is that I think it has to be based on one single principle: memotong rantai pasok, cutting the supply chain. Because the longer the chain between the central government and the people, by the time the policy actually reaches the people, what you get is a fraction of what the budget was initially intended. And that is the problem with MBG, right? It was supposed to be 15,000 rupiah, but by the time it reaches the people, it is maybe 7 to 8,000 rupiah. And that is the problem, right? Yeah, that's my view.
Okay, thank you, Pak Riza.
Okay. Thanks so much for sharing your work. Compared with Jokowi, right? Prabowo invested so much of his time for foreign visits, right? So may I hear your perspective? What are your thoughts of this international visits to get Prabowo's desire of international support? Thank you.
Anything specific that you are asking, like anything specifically that you feel strongly about, or
Yeah, having to aware that your findings, right, about the weak policy coordinations, right, that Prabowo actually expose or highlights to people. How do you deal with this, right? I mean, from the foreign perspective, they also see that okay, Prabowo doesn't have like a very strong policy coordinations, right? But he invested so much of his time going abroad, right? And the most anti-climax was during the disaster happened. He was actually abroad as well. So how do you see this? How effective it is? For international perspective to get Prabowo's desire of international support, having to notice that it's a weak policy coordinations, but he actually spent so much of his time outside. Is that a link, or what are your thoughts on it?
so my view is that sorry. My view is that yes, I agree, and Prabowo's foreign policy has been very active. I think that's very true, but hasn't been active in a way that is I don't know, institutionally aligned, or is it active in a way that achieves the the goals of Indonesia as a country? But because that's the thing, right? I don't know, like, do we know even what does Prabowo wants to achieve when he joins OECD? Has there been a study done on this? Has there been any kind of uh, strategic roadmap here in terms of what are these state visits supposed to achieve? Before each state visit, was there a meeting in which the Indonesian government assess, okay, if I were to go to the United States, what are my goals? What do I want to achieve when I come back? And I don't think that is happening, right? Like to the best of my to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that is happening. So the problem is not so much that his foreign policy is active, but that it is not institutionally grounded in a set of priorities that make sense. There are so many potential examples, right? In earlier last year, Prabowo said that he wanted to bring Gaza refugees into Indonesia for hospital treatment. I think that's commendable from a humanitarian perspective and standpoint, but nobody has actually done a study to figure out what are the concrete implications, the social implications, the burden on the healthcare system in Indonesia, what are the costs of bringing these people to Indonesia. After they come to Indonesia, do they want to leave or do they not want to leave? And I remember back then, right, because when I was looking at when I was doing research in Indonesia, one of the staffers from KSP actually contacted me and actually sent me their draft document, right, to take a look. So after Prabowo made the announcement, they sent me a draft document. One of them sent me a draft document in which I read, right. That's basically a coordination meeting between KSP and different security agencies about the risk of bring the 1,000 Gazans into Indonesia, which means to say that Bravo announced that plan before the study was actually conducted. And then domestic agencies scrambled to understand what are the implications of this policy on Indonesia's security, on Indonesia's healthcare system and things like that. I think it should be the other way around, right? Before you announce a policy, you should have done the study on it first. Okay, this makes sense in light of my national priorities. This benefits my national goals. And then I announce and implement it, at least from my view. But so that's the thing, right? I think activism is great, but activism that is not directed to achieve in pursuit of certain strategic goals becomes, I don't know, problematic in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, now question from our PhD student. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. First of all, welcome to our campus, Jefferson. Thanks for.
I'm sorry, I can't really hear you.
Okay. Now you can hear me now. Okay. First of all, welcome to our campus. Your presentation was very inclusive, and I really it touched my heart. But I have two questions. One question that Indonesia is multi-party presidential democracy. So you talk about that every time president choose the best candidate from a different party to please them, to give them position and power. So do you think the same thing happened in the US, like as a two-party system and still presidential democracy? So the same thing is happening in a two-party system democracy, or it's only happening in the multi-party presidential democracies? And the other question, does it happen in the parliamentary system like India, United Kingdom, and Pakistan? So do you think the same thing happening in multi-party system parliamentary democracy, multi-party system presidential democracy, or two-party system presidential democracy?
So your question is whether or not political accommodation also occurs in a two-party system and in parliamentary democracy in India as well, right? India, I'm not very familiar. Sorry.
Pakistan, India, and UK.
So yeah, parliamentary system,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And in which they have coalition governments also, right? I mean that is a feature of coalitions in general, right? It's not just a presidential system, right? So even in parliamentary democracies, coalition governments are pretty common, right? And there has also been coalition ministers are also included in these political party systems. So I don't find them to be pretty exceptional. So I'm not quite sure what exactly is your question actually.
Like last time, Prabhu announced in the UN Assembly that we can send 20,000 soldiers to Gaza, peacekeeping force. But it was not coordinated with other parties. Like he announced that openly in public. But I think there was no coordination with other parties, like the representative of other parties in parliament. So the same thing happened sometime in Pakistan. Like the president, the prime minister announced something, but later on the opposition opposed it in parliament. So does it affect the domestic politics in a party? Like especially if I talk about the Pakistan Muslim Noon League and People Party, something happened even in the party. People are not happy with the decision of their member of parliament. So, like in Indonesia, if, for example, one party representative announced and public media speak that we can send soldier or we can do this and that, but there is no coordination with the other party members. So, do you think that's also impact the internal politics as well or not?
As in the question is, does it impact like other parties? As in, have been policy coordination?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Like even in the case of Pakistan, which you mentioned, right, which I find it to be very fascinating, that the leader of your opposition party actually came out to oppose the policy, right? And yeah, I completely agree that there should have been policy coordination, right? And but the thing about it in your country, are there opposition party ministers in the cabinet? No, right? It's parliamentary system. It is almost definitively from the ruling party only, right? I mean that is the problem, right? When you there is then, if the opposition party is not represented in the cabinet and their presence is not huge in the parliament, then I guess the president can go, or the prime minister can go out and announce a policy like this without needing to coordinate with anybody.
Okay, Pak Philip.
I think the tendency for presidents in Indonesia to tighten controls, political controls, if possible to get near total control, happened since even before we try democracy. Sukarno did, Suharto even, and then throughout successive president post 1998, they all did the same thing. And then they tried to build this maximum winning coalition. Do you look at the Indonesian constitution during your research? Because I'm just thinking out loud here. I remember the study in Latin America, how they solved this problem of presidential system combined with multi-party system. Some of these countries, actually, I think probably Brazil as well, they set up, what is it? They give veto powers to the president, while we don't have that in Indonesia. So that's why presidents need to rely on creating coalition by giving them position, because in the hope that whatever presidents in Indonesia wanted to pass in the parliament, he or she could use this large coalition. So not going through. In some Latin American countries, you have veto powers. President can add or delete or reject the bill. In Indonesia, actually, president could not reject the bill, right? If I'm not mistaken, because even if the bill passed by the plenary session of the DPR, and the president needs to sign, if he or she didn't sign, it will be the law after 48 hours, right? They have to sign. Anyways, you agree or disagree. But, in some of these countries, actually, presidents would have veto power. So, successive presidents in Indonesia, they are so afraid that coalition in the parliament would gang up against the president. So that's why I think maybe it's probably more structural here. Because when you have an large coalition, certainly you would expect a problem of coordination. But if we have that in the institutionalized way, right, i.e., in the in the constitution, then president would be probably less inclined to set up this big coalition, because it puzzles me as well. In presidential system, we have fixed term, right? And then in direct presidential election, you rely on popular support. Why all these presidents, especially after SBY, starting with SBY, had a strong public support. They won by a comfortable margin during the presidential election. They enjoy high approval rating and so on and so forth. But yet, and fixed term, basically, you cannot remove the president if it is throughout the popular support, right? So this puzzle me. Maybe the problem is structural, i.e., if we can insert. And but that's another problem. If we add veto powers of president, then it will be problematic. So where's the balance here? Secondly, from your presentation, it seems that you concentrate on this period of President Prabowo, right? Do you think for a dissertation, is it hard to study a moving target? Because you did the interview in June, in May 2025. That means what? 7 months throughout the starting of the presidency in October 2024, or is it just a partial part of your dissertation that you are presenting, or you are doing actually in-depth analysis? Let's say since you did present some part of SBY and Jokowi, but it seems the presentation more about this period of President Prabowo, which when you did the research is only like what 6 months or 7 months in the office.
I'll answer the second one first because it's easier. I think my ambition is to try to do three presidents. So as shown on my first slide, SBY, Jokowi, and Prabowo. But of course, because things are happening right now and it's easier to talk about current developments and uh, observe them as they are unfolding and developing, it is easier, of course, to look at how problems with policy coordination occurs in the current administration. But of course, that's not my only goal. My goal, as I stated out in the beginning, is to really look at how different presidents manage the governance challenges that they faced, the different ways in which they experimented with different systems to make it work. But yeah, I can't cover all of them. I think one very interesting thing that I wanted to say, but I did not mention in the presentation, is that early on in the Jokowi administration, there was an effort to actually reorganize the coordination institutions around the president. Right, the team Sebelas, the team of 11, which was a think tank or a policy advisory team for Jokowi, organized by PDIP, actually had a plan to reorganize the presidential institution in a way that would have made it more organized and structured. So the plan would have been to combine the state secretariat with the cabinet secretariat. I spoke to Andi Wijayanto, the cabinet secretary back then. The plan was that Andi Wijayanto and Pratikno, their officers would be facing each other so that it would be easy to coordinate with each other. And the goal would have been to eventually merge the two institutions into one over time. That would have made it more structured and simplified the problem. But then, as we know, Pramono came into the picture, and because he was a very effective bridge with PDIP, the plan to merge the two institutions did not happen. So I think there's also that tendency there, right, for power dispersal in the Indonesian political system that is driven by the need for political accommodation of giving positions to so many people. And so I think that's the reason, one of the reasons why this has not happened yet, right? But I mean, it's a very interesting counterfactual, right? What happened if that has been that occurred in the Jokowi administration? Indeed, uh would SETNEC emerge as a more sort of like a more effective unit that is closer to what people have in mind for something like the White House, for instance. I think on the issue of the presidential veto, yes, there is no presidential veto in the system officially, right? But the passage of the laws and budget requires joint approval from the parliament and the president, right? And I think that is a indirect veto that we don't really emphasize. And I think that this indirect veto works, right? Because if the president doesn't want to discuss it, he just simply doesn't send a representative to parliament to talk about it, or and which rarely happens, right? And this is one of the ways which then presidents and political parties are forced to cooperate and work with each other, right? Because if they know that something is not going to be accepted by the president anyway, then there's no point even proposing this legislation, right? The problem with a lot of the Latin American democracies that follow the US Constitution is precisely that, right? That the two branches of government are separate. The president has a veto. In fact, some of them have vetoes that allow them to strike off certain lines of legislation, right? So certain articles can be struck off by the president. Then it creates a confrontational relationship between the legislature and the executive, because the legislature knows that it's going to be struck off by the president anyway, so they still pass it and it is struck off by the president. So this creates a confrontational relationship. But in Indonesia, there is a more cooperative relationship, right? Because both the parliament and the executive knows that if they want to get anything done at all, they have to work together. And I think that that favors some kind of cooperative relationship, which I think is good from the standpoint of political stability. Um, so I don't think necessarily that the presidential veto will help in this case, and in fact, it might create a new problem. But the thing about you having large coalitions, and why is it that they need these large coalitions, right? Um, I agree totally. I'm also puzzled by this. I would love to ask Indonesian presidents why do they think that's the case. Right? But I want Marcus talked about it in his book, right? And then which is really that the Indonesian presidents look at not only the fact that they don't are not facing any direct threats from parliament right now, but they are also trying to prepare for the potential of any threats emerging in the first place. So Indonesian presidents are keen to preempt a threat even before they arise. And therefore, they build these large coalitions to bring everyone in because the implication is that if you leave them outside, they will cause trouble for you at some point, which I think is very fascinating. And and that goes back to my point, right? That the emphasis here is on political control rather than policy coordination. If you are giving up one cabinet seat just for the possibility that this party will not cause trouble for you if it's outside of government, then you are sacrificing something here that I think that's not commonly understood in the coalitional presidentialism literature, right? This is that you are giving up policy effectiveness here. You are giving up potential important cabinet portfolio to someone who may not be competent because it is simply a person that was proposed by the political party, or that it could be someone who is not trustworthy or not someone that you would want to rely on because you have no personal chemistry with that person, right? So I completely agree, and it is interesting that when we look at formal institutions, we also have to look at the impact of informal rules that presidents seem to have decided that this is the best way in which a political system is organized, right? And whether or not these informal rules or these informal perceptions that they are being threatened if these political parties or these groups are outside of government needs to be interrogated in further detail if whether or not these fears and perceptions are actually valid or do they have no basis at all. Yeah, that's my view.
Okay, Pan.
In my opinion, it's a contrast. In fact, I suggest that it should be the otherwise, precisely because it is a multi-party system in which coalition ministers are not necessarily reliable. Strong coordination institutions make sense because then the president can have the best of both worlds. He can have a large cabinet, a large coalition, but his government can still be effective if he has strong coordination institutions that work for him to ensure that his policies are being implemented in an effective way. That precisely makes sense to have them, which is surprising in my opinion. Yes.
around 75 to 81%. But he was able to secure compliance after demobilize what from the Indonesian police and the Indonesian office, etc. So it is nothing. So I think that, I don't know, I can really have to check again about proposing this question. Because if you say that whether is a presidency first opportunity able to secure everything, fine. It's not very easy.
No, but you just said the same thing. That means like before we establish the legal compliance through exactly the processes that you just outlined.
Yeah.
So where's the conflict?
I don't know. I mean, it was not very easy, but the way to secure compliance.
But nobody's very easy, but they succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, but not easy. So I mean, like, you know, the difference.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, I mean,
Easy. It's not very easy. You might easy. Like you need to define. Easy. Need to explain it.
Where's the term easy?
Easy.
The ability of the president to secure the active support that has complied with this. In the brackets. Okay, yes, scratch the term easy.
I mean,
Yeah.
let me just quickly address it. I think it's true. I think I agree with what you like. I think there's like some grounds to that. But I think yes, I think it was hard for Djokovic to do it in his first term. I completely agree. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is that this has changed since then. And it has become much easier for the president to do it. I mean, you just look at all these quotes that I've pointed out here that no party is remotely interested in taking up an oppositional stance against the government. It may have been easy, it may have been very difficult in the early Jokowi administration, but I think it has become a lot more easy right now. This is why I made use of that argument. Yeah. Sorry, please go on.
So the president. So you mean this is central government, not regional government?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know whether you need to put it precisely that this is central government, because I mean, like, government can consist of different layers and government. But I think this is interesting. I mean, like, I was always questioning. We understand that Jokowi commanded control of Indonesia politics through mobilizing Indonesia policy and also the Attorney General's office to secure compliance from the Indonesian elite. But I'm wondering, and I also talked to fellow politicians, why Prabowo has been able to secure compliance so far. Well, it is not very clear whether he, unlike Jokowi, who blatantly mobilized Indonesia Police or Attorney General office, but why he could still secure compliance from Indonesia elite. And just like Jokowi, he does not do it easily. Even if you recently, I mean, like, he spoke publicly that actually he was hesitantly said, and I mean, like, implying his statements that it was not very easy to secure compliance from the elite. And I think that is clear that from the interview, you spoke to several elite, and then I understood right now that indeed some parties, they are hoping that Prabowo can only stay for 2 terms, and then after that, Democrat can take power. So there are several answers why Prabowo has been able to secure compliance from the elite right now. Probably if you can provide more stronger evidence, in terms of monetary compensations to the elite, posts that are given to retain their loyalty and etc. That is going to be stronger evidence that you can provide rather than providing evidence that I will stay with Prabowo right now because after 2 years from after 2 terms from now, I can be securing power after Prabowo goes from power. That sort of thing. But yeah, nice presentations and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree and I appreciate the feedback. I think that's something that I would want to look into as well.
Okay, thank you so much. It is interesting that we end this discussion with debate whether it is easy or not to be a Indonesian politician. Maybe we can say go back to Coldplay song. It who yeah. Oh yeah.
So thanks everyone. So this is basically a trial run for him. So he's about to return to ANU, and then he's got a few months to look at his data, and then he has what we call the midterm review, and he will get a grilling that is similar to what you have given him today. So thank you very much. Just a few observations from my side, and I hope he's taking some notes. Just for information as well to everybody else. So the thesis started out, and I think that's where it needs to move back to in some way. A study on what is called in the literature the presidential center. So the institutions, what you now sort of have re-termed as coordination institutions of the presidency to ensure power maintenance and its execution, right? And in the Indonesian case, you've listed them later on, and that is now KSP, the State Secretariat, the Cabinet Secretariat, and so forth. So the question that came out of that, and I'm very grateful to you to raise these kinds of things, because the question really that holds it all together is how come that we now have a hegemonic presidency that evolved over time? And yes, of course, Suharto was already a hegemonic president, but then after 1998, we've seen attempts to constrain presidents, and it worked for many, but the last 2 presidents have worked themselves way into a hegemonic presidency. So how come that we have seen that trend, but at the same time, none of them have either chosen or managed to establish a strong presidential center, right? So I think we can all agree if you now go to KSP, a think tank, right? At best, very little coordination happening there. Why are presidents not doing what they could do with their political control and establish what in America is the West Wing? Yeah, and he mentioned this was part of the plan when Jokowi came in. Yeah, they said we want to have a West Wing, hence we have KSP, and Luhut was on the way to establishing that. With his personal authority, but then it stopped. They threw in Tete, and he turned it into a think tank, and it became weak again. Right. So that is the core of the question. Right. So you have strong political control, but weak presidential centers, and that's where the comparative aspects come in with Brazil and other countries where these centers are a lot stronger. Now, your point, absolutely, and I really want you to listen to this. Your theories need to be consistent with the assumption that people do not seek power for good governance, but for the extraction of resources. So you, and this is what you're conflating now, you're conflating policy coordination with good governance. And this is something, we've had this debate very early on. Maybe because he's from Singapore and he believes that policies need to be good and effective. And I have tried to extract that from him, this sort of normative assumptions about policy. So I think the argument needs to be consistent with the assumption that good coordination institutions, presidential centers, are not only good for good governance, but they are key to power maintenance and resource extraction and all these things that you mentioned, right? So I'm absolutely sold on that assumption, and it needs to be going into that direction. So don't talk too much about what should be happening and you should be doing this, they should be doing that. Look at what is occurring and try to explain that phenomenon. And again, and the research puzzle is, why do we have such strong hegemonic political control and they don't bother to actually build up an institutionalized power base around the palace? And that has been going on for some time. Again, SBY tried, then Jokowi came in, West Wing didn't happen. Now Prabowo comes in, the strongest hegemonic presidency of the post-Suharto era, and yet again, he doesn't seem to care at all about those institutions around him. Again, the KSP, the first one he put in there, he got rid of him because nothing happened. Now he has another one who is also not pretty close to the president, so not much seems to be occurring there. The question is, why is that the case? Because it's clearly running against their interest of policy coordination, not in the sense of good governance, but to actually consolidate their power even more. And in the case of the MBG, I mean, he gave you the chance basically of a penalty kick, and you you didn't really take it, because the MBG is a massive patronage machine of policy accommodation. Everyone's in it. Everyone has a share. Every member of parliament, every Bupati, every Anggota DPRD has a member of the family who has a part of it. Right? So that speaks towards your focus on accommodation as the primary interest. And it then speaks towards the inability that comes out of that to actually make the policy work, because Prabowo has an interest that it works if he wants to get reelected in 2029. Now, the patronage machine is working, setting aside the fact that he doesn't have the money actually to run it. But as a patronage machine, it's working, but the policy is not terribly popular. Yeah, all the polls are saying that to us. MBG's support is soft, and it doesn't guarantee him re-election. So again, all of what you're saying needs to be consistent with the assumption that politicians are actually in it, not for the goodness of their hearts and all that stuff, but actually for the hard power politics of resource distribution, extractions, and all of what he's been talking about. So we're trying to move you away from even the last slide, right? So the implications of policy and what Indonesia should be doing and what it should not be doing. That's not really your concern, right? So in political science, we're looking at what's happening, why it's happening, and then we leave it to the Crawford School in ANU, which is the public policy school, to take the next step and tell us here's how the policy should be designed. So I think again, I'm really proud of him. He has done a great job over the last year interviewing people, but now the hard work starts, right? So that is looking at the material, taking all of what you guys have been saying into account, and then turning it into a story, a narrative, an analysis of what Indonesia looks like at this point. So not a question, but just a comment from.
Okay. Yeah.
That's exactly what we want to try to build here, right? So I'm glad that our PhD students are here to understand the kind of political science that we want to build, right? We separate normative assumptions and then we do it as it is, testing hypothesis, and then look at the research problem and then the way we understand through some kind of a robust methodology and analysis. And thank you. I hope all our students take notes on this, because sometimes it's hard to separate activism from being a political scientist, in my view. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Any final comment from you? Oh,
For the politicians. Oh, no, I haven't got.
I've been wondering.
We recently recruited for a position at AU, and he knows what's coming. So we had 167 applications, and one was working on the role of shamans in South Korea in terms of their relationship to outer space. It wasn't quite a good fit for this kind of
In the past, Pilar Hana wrote good articles about Indonesian influence surrounding president.
right.
Somebody needs to revisit this.
Yes, so we have the School of Culture, History, and Language. I mean, I'm not downplaying that, and certainly with Jokowi and Kustur and others. I mean, it's certainly there was a lot about that. But at the same time, and I made this point a lot in my writing, I reject the attempt to culturally essentialize the word. Right? This whole thing about the Jokowi, the Japanese king, right? Because I do think there's nothing in the political behavior of Jokowi or Prabowo that we cannot explain with traditional political science terms. Very similar to what's happening in Latin America and other parts of the world. The culturalist stuff is often the fluff that these politicians build around their appetite for power. Oh, I do this because, but it's not really helpful. And even the South Korean president, he was famous for listening to these soothsayers and but at the end of the day, they're talking about the sacrifice. You are talking about who has power, who gets what are the resources, who gets them, who doesn't get them, and everything else is decoration.
okay. Any final comment from you? That's enough? Okay, thank you so much. So I think we coming from Pak Markus, we can say that whether it is debatable that it is easy or not being Indonesian politician, but we can agree or disagree about that point. But we can agree that it is not easy being Indonesian citizen right now because Pak Marcos already mentioned about hegemonic presidency to some extent. A lot of things happening last year, and we expect more things to happen this year as well. So I think that's all from me as moderator. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Should we take picture together? You can sit here with me. Yeah.
Oh ya. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good luck. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Dulu tuh zaman almarhum ya, saya sering keselipis. Semangat udah lama. Apa dia pas nulis buku apa namanya partai yang jadi sekeliling partai lah dia di promosi oh karena mau profesor saya dulu dulu ya dulu dia kadep jadi kalau minister kan gua kadep di sekolah dulu iya gua kalau bisa nolak mau nolak dulu itu ya dulu kan udah 2 kali kan ya di sama kami generasi saya yang kena apa tidak obat oh itu malas banget mas ya di jadi saya juga dalam rangka dari ini dari waktu dua ya mau tapi gila udah jadi lebih banyak sih jadi pemeriksaan di lagi posisi sampai jumpa ya pendapat deteksi itu di sini. Kalau lu kan di Bandung, lu bantuin Trump ya saya tahu tuh iya iya. Kalau saya lu beberapa tapi karena lu pakai kamu sekarang
konsisten di jalanan gitu.
Iya. Keren. Jangan tempat yang kabur. Ini trial sebenarnya. Unusual. Oh, lu sering ngopi. Kadang dia nganter anaknya berenang. Dio. Les gitu satu. Jadi gak ada temen gua.
Iya, jadi kayak ini bro, mas kapan dulu? Ya, suka dulu. Aduh, gua tadi ini pakai kampung. Pakai kampung.
Dia nggak
Dia
udah terus sampai belum?
tadi kemana sih? Mana sih? Mau coba di sini. Keluar. Mobilnya masih ada nggak? Baik. Oh yang baru.
Oh yang baru jalur PNS sekarang udah negeri ya. Iya.
Yang baru. Jakarta. Kalau nggak mau di Jakarta, dua. Ada yang korbannya sudah bisa keluar.
Ya mendingan di sini lah. Saya kebetulan banget kampusnya. Saya baru kali ini mas, baru pertama kali. Dari dulu mas Arfi main sih. Kampus dulu iya. Masih gondrong masih di pakai rebang aja tuh. Dia hijau dari ini dia berbau. Enggak pakai tidur ini sedikit tidur ini. Jauh, jadi aku nggak tahu. Tadi malah aku gedung itu kayak I prefer with the something or not ya kamu sih masih fokus di pos dulu kan masih ya environment Oh iya iya. Iya. Aku naik ojol. Ini fisik di sini ya. Tapi nggak saya. Kamu di sini gedung ini tinggal di mana? Ekonomi lah. Oke. Ini sih. Oke. Oh, jadi sampai di Jakarta. Oh. I can put this at back as well. Yeah, okay. Oh, email aja bisa. Oh, enggak email aja. Di email aja. Satu orang per perwakilan. Ya, ya, bukan tidak. Yes. Hah? Oh, pilih bentar. Jadi oh, ya, when is it doctor? Di mana cak? Hah? Kapan kita juga presentasi? Wah, nanti in the far future lah. Nah, tahu.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2. Okay.
Makasih Mbak ya.
Masih.
Apa yang berarti sekarang ya? More level. Berarti kamu tinggi deh. Kalau sponsor resolution-nya.
Ya, juga tidak sering harus ya.
Karena jauh kan? Aku pernah tinggal di kota sendiri, tapi lumayan juga deh. Emang kamu dua, dua apa? Ini kalau kafe bilang satu. Ah, naik loh. Kamu ke? Biasanya gelarnya satu tadi dua begini. Jadi gitu buat sama. Berat. Berat.
Ya, pokoknya satu take.